I hope this video will encourage you and keep strong in the faith, because there's a lot of videos on YouTube, and especially there is a growing group of people who want to understand eschatology, right? What is Revelation all about? And more people fall in the doctrine full of hyper preterism. And what does it mean? That means that everything, including the millennium reign, including the short season of Satan, and also even the great white throne judgment, everything already happened. And I want to talk about this because this morning I watched a video, because I always want to hear people out what they have to say before I reject it. And there was a video about a guy who fell into the full preterism view, but now he left everything behind. His entire faith is just nullified, because he realizes that also full preterism has some problems when it goes to interpretations. Yes, full preterists have a lot of great points, right? It seems to fit, but all you're left is with this world we're living in now. And look, this world is going down more and more. I heard one guy say that look at this world with an open eyes. It only gets better and better and better. But I don't see it getting better and better. I see that this world is going down. God's values, God's laws are more and more rejected. And this world is, this age as we knew it, it's a fact that the world as we knew it is coming to an end. So there are also people who go into full preterism, and that leads them eventually to lose their faith that there even is a God. That's why I always emphasize, I made a video about discipleship, that if you really want to know God, go first in the wilderness. A lot of people, they become Christian and then they go to a Bible school, but they never go into the wilderness. Right? This guy had a conversation with a scholar and a book writer and a PhD and seminaries, and he came to the conclusion that it is all false. Right? Also, Bart Ehrman is one of them. But did they really go into the wilderness? And what I mean is, when God came in my life, and even if you say, oh, God is not real, that was faith. I had faith. My life changed from one day to the other, and I was hungry, but I didn't want to go into a church system and let man teach me. I did something God told me to do, at least. That was my faith, right? If you don't believe it, that's what I believed. And I went to a different country to be in the wilderness, meaning I separated myself from everyone for a few years. No one was telling me nothing. It was just me and my faith. And I went places I never ever dreamt of going. My life increased. I had a mission. I had a message. All right? Everything got better and better. And I feel blessed. And without this faith, I would still be miserable, because I was miserable. But some people say, you know what? No matter how you look at it, it doesn't fit. So it must all be wrong. Well, because you never went into the wilderness. Therefore, you have to always have that foundation of faith first, right? Don't go in a church and then everything stays the same, and you start going to seminaries or you watch YouTube videos. No, ground your faith. See if it's real, right? Even Paul said, right? Test yourself whether you're in a faith. So that is very important. And I see many people leaving the faith, but did they truly ever have faith? So through different circumstances and through testimonies and through my faith, I learned God is real. I feel it, I know it, I proved it. For without God, this whole mission I did would have been a total failure, and I would have been gone back with my tail between my legs to where I started, and I would have just picked up my old life. So I did think about Revelation a lot, and I read it through and through with a futurist view. Then I heard someone say, what about preterism, right? What about if something or that everything already happened? So I read it to this idea, through and through. And then I read it with partial preterism, that most of it is already fulfilled, but there are still things coming. And I read it through and through. And it is still hard. I made a whole bunch of notes, and it is still very hard to see what is really going on. But does that make it false? Does my lack of understanding prove that it is not true? No, that is not. Right? Many people go to Daniel and prove things, but there are so many references. Right? Again, is your faith real, or do you try to disprove God? For many preterists, they feel a sigh of relief that they don't have to worry about finding out what's really going on. They say this already everything happened, and that gives them a relief from all this confusion. But I think there is more to it, and I will give you in this video also my view, what I think about Revelation. So there are many problems with preterism, but I also see problems with futurism. So I tend to be a partial preterist, right? And I will go over some things. Maybe I will make some videos more in depth. But the thing is with, for example, preterists, when things don't fit, they try to spiritualize it or something, right? Like the resurrection, right? The Jesus was the only one who was raised bodily, but the rest is just a physical a spiritual resurrection, and your body stays in the grave, right? Some even believe that no, the resurrection was talking about the corporate body of Christ only, and there are all these views to make it fit. But also with futurism there are some problems, because clearly in the first century they were eagerly waiting and anticipating that the kingdom of Christ will be established very soon. Now, do I believe it happened in 70 AD? I don't believe that happened in 70 AD, but as I read Revelation, I see that those things is a gradual process. It was not one day, boof. It was a gradual process. That's how I see it, right? So I do believe that the kingdom was come, right? The kingdom is at hand, right? But Jesus also said, don't say it's here and there, it's within you. That's why many people couldn't see the kingdom, because they didn't have it in them. And I think a lot of these were also church fathers who clung to a form of faith, but didn't have the kingdom inside of them. But when I listen to these preterists, for example, one of the problems I encountered is they only focus on this doctrine, but they don't understand other doctrines. And that's what I believe. I'm first led into understanding other doctrines, like who are the true Israelites. Because they say, well, the gospel had to be preached to every creature under heaven, and that clearly couldn't have happened, right? At least the guy who walked away from preterism said it. But because he still thinks that Israel now is the chosen people. He doesn't understand that the kingdom was now inside. The people became the temple of God, right? And these people in Europe became the church, yes. And over time, even nations were founded on principles which they spoke about. So understanding that the kingdom did come, right? The lost tribes were reconciled to God. And it is so important to decipher this whole thing, right? Paul even went to the Greeks, right? The church teaches us that Greeks were pagans, nothing to do with Israel. But listen to what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 10. He's talking to these Greeks in Corinth. Moreover, brethren, he calls them his brothers, I would not that you would be ignorant how that all our fathers were under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and were all baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and did all eat the same spiritual meat, and all drink of the same spiritual rock. And we know that Paul also went to Rome, and he said the same thing to them, and he was planning on going to Spain. But we also know they were already Christians in the first century in England, if you do some research. And also, of course, these churches who believed they themselves told the others. And this is how the gospel was preached already to all creatures. And then the end of the Jewish age would come. But if you don't understand this, it will influence the entire eschatology of Revelation. So it is very important to realize that the mission of Jesus was, when he said it, that he came for the lost sheep of Israel. And that happened 2,000 years ago. Now you can debate or reject the Bible about how it exactly happened, what date, how long it took. That is, we know when we look at history and where we live in it now. Look at Europe. These are Christian nations. Look at America. It's a Christian nation. And without this message in the first century, this would not have happened. These lost tribes would have still believed in Wodan or in Zeus or all the other pagan gods they adopted after they were divorced from God. But Jesus reconciled them. And we see that the kingdom of Christ, through their belief, faith, by grace, through faith, they were renewed. They became new creatures. They became the Christians we still see today. Does that mean that I believe in Israel only? No, of course not. But we have to realize first, what was the role of Israel? Why did God call them a peculiar people? What was their task? So the Bible tells us they were to be a light to the world, right? Through Abraham's seed, all families of the earth will be blessed. If this kingdom of Christ was not established in the first century, no one on earth would have even heard about God or Jesus, right? Not in Africa, not in China, nowhere would the name Jesus even be mentioned, right? But we see that these Christians in Europe, they translated the Bible, they preserved the Bible, and eventually started to bring the word to other nations. Now, was it perfect? No. So how come that this kingdom was not perfect yet? Well, I made some notes, and just bear with me, and I'm going to show you how you can also see it, right? And that doesn't contradict our faith and the world we're living in now, right? Revelation 2, we see that the believers would have power over the nations. They did, right? They worship before God's feet. We see that all these lost tribes started to worship God, right? We see a New Jerusalem come down from heaven. The New Jerusalem is not in outer space. It came down on earth from heaven. This is where the redeemed children of Israel lived, right? And these overcomers will also sit on the throne. That means they would operate in the authority of God. If you're a child of God and you have the Spirit of God, that means you have authority over others, right? Revelation 4. It's talking about an explanation. God created all things for God's pleasure. It was God's pleasure to reunite Israel, for they were going to be a light to the world, right? In Revelation 5, they would reign on the earth, right? Let me see. But then we also see that there will be people killed by a sword, right? And we see, bear with me, there is a great wrath, right, on the unbelievers, right? It's talking about a destruction, right? The first seal, right? There were servants sealed to rule as kings and priests, but there were also destructions, right? But God will dwell among them. 7:15. God will be with the believers, right? So we see that even also in 9, there was a Roman army coming up, right? And they worshipped Apollyon, right? So it was not one day to the other that this kingdom was established. Yes, the kingdom was in the believers, but it was not a perfect kingdom yet. And what I believe that this kingdom that went on and on and on and on and grew and grew and grew, right? And we are now in the short season where Satan is released, and he has the same devices, because Satan, which basically means the adversaries, Babylon, we see in the first century, who was Satan towards the Israelites? Those were the Edomite Jews. They were anti-Christ. They rejected Christ, and they even corrupted some true Israelites, also rejecting Christ. This is what Revelation all about, right? He's putting plagues on them. He's putting things on them in order for them to repent. So it was not one day to the after. You're gonna say in 70 AD it happened, right? It was a process. I know, there is a lot of questions popping up, and the more you think about it, the more questions you have. But don't let these questions discourage you in the faith, right? The fact that scholars or scientists or people who went to Bible school and they start to look into this and they come to the conclusion, well, I can't figure it out, so it must not be true. Let that not discourage you, right? It is not our understanding that, it is so complicated, and maybe it's not complicated, but don't let your faith be wary about this, right? Because is your faith real? I feel it. I have faith, and even if they would prove to me that Revelation is not true, I would still have faith, because it changed my life. It transformed me for the better, right? But I think God is real, right? And the only reference we have to God is the scriptures, right? At least if you also understand the right translations, because also the translations are a problem here and there. So Revelation is very hard to figure out without an understanding of the Old Testament. But also Revelation is very hard to figure out with the false translations we see in all these English Bibles. And also Revelation is very hard to figure out if you have the other doctrines wrong. That's why we have to look at the entire picture, and it is a lot of work, but it has nothing to do with your faith. You see channels that talk only about Preterism, or you see channels that only talk about Anglo-Israelites. You have channels who talk only about the Trinity is not right, but I try to put everything I know on this channel, so everything has a place. It's not because you cannot understand scripture when other things are wrong and false, right? It just becomes a mess. And even I see people call themselves scholars, and all they have done is for decades try to study the eschatology of Revelation, and all this time they still believe the old church fathers' doctrines, which were just very off. So you have to understand everything, right? But not to be saved. But if you want to figure it out, you have to look at other things too, because if one thing is false, it will directly influence something else. So that's why I'm so zealous to handle different topics on this channel. So full preterists, they believe that everything happened 2000 years ago and this is it, right? This is it. The world just, some believe it gets just worse and worse infinitely. They don't know how long it will take. Doesn't matter, you fly off to heaven. That's what they basically believe. To just get over with all the confusions, they just accept that belief. But look at the world now. One even said, look at the world, it's getting better and better. Look at the world now. Look at the European nations and America, South Africa and Australia. Look at what's happening. I made a video about Jacob and Esau, and it fits perfectly with what we see happening now. They want to get rid of Christianity. They want to get rid of the descendants of Israel. You see it happening. The clergy plan, the mass immigrations, the outlawing of free speech, right? Christianity more and more ridiculed. Christians, Israelites walking away from the faith. Christians worshipping people in the Middle East who call themselves the State of Israel. And it is all a big mess. And if God does not step in, right? Whether you believe it's the second coming, or if you believe that we are now in Satan's deception and the great white throne judgment is at the door, doesn't matter what you believe. If God does not step in, there will not even be Christianity no more. So if you're full preterist, you have to realize that the world is going under. And if Europe goes and America goes, the entire world will go. Right? We see that Esau is still ruling the nations of Jacob, to the banking system, and you name it, to the media, all these things. But this must come to an end. And if full preterists are right, this will not coming to an end, and this world will be increasingly become more and more evil. So there must happen something, and I believe that. I have faith in that, right? Because the promise is that Jacob will have the dominion over this earth, and they will rule in righteousness, true righteousness. Esau destroys other peoples and other nations and bring them into our countries, also destroying our economies and our culture, and taking with them other gods, right? That is the plan of Esau. It has always been destruction. Jacob understands that he is supposed to be a light to the world, that all families of the earth will be blessed, and that will happen. That will happen. So don't lose your faith over videos, right? Don't think because people are come up with good verses and make it fit. When it destroys your faith, walk away from it. Walk away, right? Walk away from anyone who denies Scripture and who denies Christ, because He is our hope too. Not just in the first century, He is also our hope of glory.